Undertale is a very diverse game when it comes to subjects of conversation, and that's something that's absolutely developed with time. So much so that it almost feels like you can track the evolution of discussion surrounding it through different eras, like chapters of this game's ever-evolving identity. Last year, I discussed what I believe to be the current era of Undertale analysis, primarily focused on the game's meta-narrative and self-reflective messaging. Years of examining the game from a surface level, quote-unquote, led many, myself included, to seek a deeper appreciation of the work. Undertale is undoubtedly a game with a lot to say, and with Deltarune integrating many of those themes into its story, often either evolving or challenging the questions asked by its predecessor, now is a better time than ever to try and enrich your experience with not only Undertale, but the Undertale series, as Toby Fox calls it. Where that goes from here, who's to say? But in the face of our deepening understanding of this game, not just as a piece of art, but as a continually relevant message in this medium, I'd be lying if I said I don't often miss a simpler time, to a degree. I mean, it's easy to say I miss being 12 and stupid and not having any responsibilities beyond watching comic dubs, but to don my determination-tinted glasses for a second, I think there's something kind of beautiful about both a budding community and budding comprehension. Call it decade-old nostalgia bubbling to the surface, God knows I'm the first person to put early Undertale fandom and beautiful in the same sentence, but in spite of whatever rough edges the social aspect might have had, I think looking back on the rudimentary state of analysis is interesting at the very least. We were working within a smaller scope, that aforementioned surface level is where we spent most of our time, and somewhere along the scale of Gasser's theme remixes to multiversal Christmas parties, you could find an underlying sense of earnestness, one that arguably became harder to find as time progressed. Fixation on the game's meta elements has, in some ways, meant the neglect of sincerity, which is to say, questions surrounding what Toby Fox is trying to say through Sans, for example, about completionism and consumption and warped attachments, have drowned out questions about what Toby Fox is trying to say through Sans about Sans, the character. Both types of questions are important to ask, I wouldn't have made an entire video about the former if they weren't, but it's almost as if sides of this game's identity had to fight each other for relevance in the past, which I don't think needs to be the case. We're lucky to be closer to that balance than we've ever been, whether you want to discuss Undertale as a compelling character-driven story or a comprehensive deep dive and subversion of genre conventions, you're likely to find your people either way. But even now, there are definitely certain widespread missteps within those conversations, and we'll be looking at one of the most recurring. Mischaracterization is not a problem exclusive to Undertale, and you're likely to find it in every corner of every fanbase at every opportunity, whether you're searching for it or not. We've all had that feeling, engaging with the discussion of a creative work, only to see an interpretation that fires off a "they would not say that" alarm in your head. And to untint my glasses for a second, this was absolutely a bigger issue in the past when it comes to Undertale. No amount of nostalgia can hide that fact. A good 70% of fans didn't even understand what they/them meant in 2015. You think they were ready to unpack Chara Dreemurr as a character? Absolutely not. Some people still don't and aren't. But this widespread misunderstanding of a large portion of Undertale's main cast led to the phenomenon we're currently unpacking. Dual mischaracterization, as I've dubbed it, the double negative of character analysis. To provide an example, let's take a look at Vegetoid, a character who I can fairly comfortably say never faced any widespread misconceptions. What do we know about them? Well, they're pretty passionate about vegetables. Eating your greens is the easy method to get them into a spareable state. We understand Vegetoid. But wait, what's this? Some gremlin has come out of the woodwork and is claiming that Vegetoid hates vegetables. That's fundamentally untrue. The text states the exact opposite. Why is this a widespread opinion now? Well, we can't counteract the misinformation with the pre-existing text. People saw that and still came to the wrong conclusion. All we can do to fight is to sensationalize. Vegetoid adores veggies, and not only do they adore them, their love of greens is so vast that all other plant-based foods are inferior to them. Vegetoid hates fruit. And this is the result. In an attempt to course correct from that initial mischaracterization, we've wound up with a new version of Vegetoid that reflects them just as poorly. Two warring factions arguing for the validity of two characters that never existed. Meanwhile, the true Vegetoid, the idea that means so much to us, fades into the shadows, only to be appreciated by truck freak level fans and charming YouTube analyzers. Just like regular mischaracterization, this is far from an Undertale exclusive problem. Reconfiguring a character's identity on a community level scale and taking things a little too far is a very common practice. However, I think Undertale's history and current standing exacerbates these issues beyond their typical effect. So many people hold such incredible, mostly justified, disdain for the misguided perception of these characters in the early fandom era that anything that isn't that perception is welcomed with open arms regardless of accuracy. And there's perhaps no better example of that than with Mr. Undertale himself, Sans the Skeleton. No, I didn't make an entire video essay in response to "well, this stinks" blowing up. I've had this thumbnail for like a year, you gotta trust me. Sans is unquestionably the Undertale character that's been analyzed the most over the years, and that's not at all surprising. He's truly grown beyond the borders of his game, in more ways than one. Just like his battle theme, not that one, his notoriety has far eclipsed that of Undertale itself, firmly cementing him not just as a 21st century gaming icon, but an internet icon. Combine that with a mysterious backstory and the best fight in the game, gameplay-wise at least, and it's no wonder he's had a magnifying glass on him for years. And as much as I'll praise Flowey's depth and Chara's conceptual weirdness nowadays, the funny skeleton man still stands as my favorite Undertale character. Whether or not that makes me basic is something I stopped caring about years ago. Good character writing doesn't stop being good character writing when met with popularity. With that said, Sans being so widely known and widely enjoyed has made him a prime candidate for mischaracterization twice over. A recurring theme you'll come to notice is that nuance is confusing and scary. Multifaceted characters with many notable elements are more difficult to discuss than ones with a few standout traits you can pinpoint. As such, a lot of Undertale's cast gets heavily sanded down on both sides of the dual mischaracterizing process, ridding them of most, if not all, of their complexity. Sans is an obvious example, and probably the most well-known. Early impressions of Sans leaned heavily into the tragic aspect of his character, the depressed scientist from another world. He wore his emotions on his sleeve at all times, whether sad enough to be pushed to tears or angry enough to remember your genocides. This Sans was solely defined by his despair. It encompassed the entirety of his portrayal, angsty fan art aplenty. On the other side of the spectrum, modern-day mischaracterization gets you goofball Sans. This initially seems more authentic than his former husk. He's lazy, struggles to care about anything, and always looks for the opportunity to fire off a bad pun, things that we all associate with the guy. It's only by peeling back the surface layer that the missteps become evident. For one, and this is not the only time we'll be seeing this, so-called rectifications of poor character comprehension in Undertale have this funny tendency to write off established traits associated with that comprehension as fanon. That being fan canon, for those of you who are less online, but I mean, you're watching an Undertale video essay, I have my doubts. In an attempt to fully abandon the Sans of the past, concrete portions of his identity are often thrown to the wayside. Let's take a detailed look. The first step to misunderstanding any character is taking them at face value. This applies in two key places for Sans. One is obviously in the way he initially presents himself. Now, to call Sans' humor purely a disguise would be very disingenuous. This is still a major slice of his identity. He's comic Sans at the end of the day, and that's a trait that sticks with him no matter the situation. He uses his comedy to connect with people, to show them that he cares, and most of all, he likes it. Sans' humor brings him solace in situations where there's no audience but himself. It's not just for show. Being a comedian is clearly something that's important to him, but it's also just one building block of his character. Sans is indeed a deeply sad person. This aspect of him is often downplayed because of just how emphasized it was in the early days, but those assessments, however exaggerated, were made for a reason. What trips people up, to my understanding, is the fact that Sans doesn't display his sadness in ways that we conventionally expect one to. When he finds out his brother is dead, he doesn't cry or kick the snow or fall to his knees and yell, "Woe is me" at the sky. Ceiling, I guess. He doesn't stop Frisk dead in their tracks and instantly beat them into the ground, as we know he's capable of doing. He just disappears. He effectively removes himself from the narrative until it's time to play his role as the judge, which leads us into the second misconception about Sans that has to be dismantled. The idea that he doesn't care. To be fair, it's easy to see how people come to this conclusion. Sans' laziness is at the very forefront of his characterization. The Skelebro's entire introduction and preceding segment in the game relies on the comedic juxtaposition of Papyrus trying way too hard and Sans trying way too little. This is something that continues far beyond Snowden. And even once you start to dig deeper into the story, you seemingly find an explanation for Sans' apathy, not a rebuttal. He may not remember your genocides, but he fully understands the fact that the anomaly could send him and the entire underground into one at any time should they so choose. So why even bother? If there's no telling when a being with power beyond your comprehension can force you back to square one, what's the point of calibrating your puzzles, or furthering progress on your machine, or doing anything? He says as much in his battle. Look, I gave up trying to go back a long time ago, and getting to the surface doesn't really appeal anymore, either. Because even if we do, we'll just end up right back here, without any memory of it, right? To be blunt, it makes it kinda hard to give it my all. But it's a later line that I think causes the most confusion. All I know is, seeing what comes next, I can't afford not to care anymore. This is often taken as confirmation that Sans has truly given up on everything. The assumption being that because he's bringing attention to the fact that he's uncharacteristically hands-on in these extremely dire, universe-shattering circumstances, the opposite must be true in every other situation. He lets his brother die. He allows Asgore's plan to be disrupted. He cares here, so he doesn't care elsewhere. Right? Wrong. We cannot take Sans' word as objective fact, especially when his word is about himself. This line does not directly tell us about Sans, it tells us what Sans thinks about Sans, and he does not think of himself very highly. Buried under the depressive attributes that are often picked up on, Sans harbors a decent amount of self-hatred, loathing for the things he hasn't done or is incapable of doing. This is often explored under the guise of simple, jokey comparison, like in his pacifist judgment. If you refuse to fight, Asgore will take your soul and destroy humanity. But if you kill Asgore and go home, monsters will remain trapped underground. What'll you do? Well, if I were you, I would have thrown in the towel by now. But you didn't get this far by giving up, did you? This is pushed further by his dialogue in more severe contexts, like an aborted genocide ending where no major characters are left alive. It's gotten so quiet. There's a bad feeling hanging over everyone. Like, everyone's just gonna die here, trapped in the dark. I bet you're wondering why I'm not the ruler. I'm not cut out for something like that. I like to take it easy, you know? That's a joke. This is what happens when people like me take it easy. In spite of his supposed apathy, Sans is incapable of not feeling guilty for situations he knows he could have prevented, even knowing that those situations likely lack permanence, which is abundantly clear in his reaction to Papyrus's death. This is a moment that people love to explore and interpret, and we'll talk about that later. No, he doesn't hunt you down on the spot and throw his promise in the dirt, but he's very obviously impacted, and that's not something he even attempts to hide. Sans adores his brother, that much is clear. There are a lot of beautiful blink and you'll miss it moments in their relationship, like Sans instantly assuming Frisk is being sarcastic if they dare to suggest Papyrus isn't cool, or him avoiding the crossword Baby Bones banter entirely in a Geno run, choosing instead to back up Papyrus's junior jumble tangent just to make him feel better. And he doesn't hesitate to call you out both before and especially after laying a finger on his brother. His hatred is plainly spoken. What we see here is one of the central internal conflicts of Sans' character, which, ironically, sort of embodies our two mischaracterizations, the polarity between the different sides of Sans' personality. On one end, you have the genius scientist who knows that his life and decisions barely matter from a fairly objective standpoint, the impartial judge whose role is to witness and dictate, not intervene and engage. And you have comic Sans the skeleton, who has no choice but to accept the life he's been given, to participate in the world as he knows it. The friend who would abandon his duty because of a promise to someone he cares about. The brother who will permanently slink into the shadows if harm befalls his younger sibling. These core tenets are what comprise Sans' character, and they're often intertwined through his actions, like an endless layering of joke books and quantum physics books. It's why you get moments like him claiming you're entitled to your view of the world, only to threaten you for killing his brother a second later. His entire battle can be seen as the marrying of these two philosophies. Yes, he's stopping you because he has to, because the universe is on the line, but that's clearly not all this is about. Sans has a deeply personal stake in the fight. He vents about the issues that he feels you are responsible for. You're not just a scientific anomaly to him, but a disgusting shell of a person that he'll gladly curse out as he subjects you to karmic justice. However, while these attributes usually work in tandem to inform Sans' outlook and actions, they can be at odds just as often. Which brings us to his most important trait that's often overlooked and unrecognized, his hopefulness. The Lost Soul segment of Azrael's fight in the Pacifist finale gives us the unique opportunity to see Sans completely and entirely vulnerable. While he's certainly candid during his Geno battle, it's still within the context of talking to an enemy. We're not going to see him completely unguarded here, and even his moments of sincerity are often punctuated with humor. He's quick to brush off his explanation for the root of his misery as a potential excuse to be lazy, for example, but his lost form provides no such distractions. While most characters are sent back to a state we recognize, that being before Frisk entered their lives and changed them for the better, Sans is completely deprived of his familiarity. He's fully despondent, to an extent that we haven't seen before. Just give up. I did. Why even try? You'll never see them again. As we know from his secret lab, Sans is a place that he wants to go back to, a different world, one that he's seemingly incapable of reaching. We're 99% sure it's Deltarune. There are many interesting implications if it is Deltarune, but for the purpose of this analysis, the place itself is irrelevant. It can be anywhere. This is a crucial piece of information, because it's yet another catalyst for his emotional state. Sans is trapped in every sense of the word. He's trapped in the underground with the rest of monsterkind, doomed to wallow in the darkness. Suppose he escapes that fate. He's still trapped in this dimension, one that he struggles to call home, and on top of it all, even if he were able to find a way back, he's still at the mercy of a looping timeline allowing him to maintain that progress. He's like a goldfish in a plastic baggie inside of a larger fish tank, wall after wall after wall. It's no wonder he has moments of despair. But in spite of it all, in spite of the burden of knowledge, in spite of being boxed in on multiple levels of reality, Sans isn't able to fully extinguish that last ember of hope, an ember that can grow into something beautiful should you allow it to. The whole point of the Lost Soul segment is to revert everyone back to square one, eliminating all of their development, leaving them in a state antithetical to the people they have now become, and that's just as true for Sans. Frisk's determination, brilliant and unstoppable, is able to shatter through his uncertainty just like it shatters through every other wall in its path, to the point where Sans can't help but buy into the hype, even if it goes against everything he knows to be true. So, your journey's almost over, huh? You must really want to go home. Hey, I know the feeling, buddo. Though, maybe sometimes it's better to take what's given to you. Down here, you've already got food, drink, friends. Is what you have to do really worth it? Forget it. I'm rooting for you, kid. Even after describing their upcoming confrontation with Asgore as an impossible situation in his aforementioned Judgement, he's still willing to dream, to indulge the idea of an achievable, brighter future. You have something called determination, so as long as you hold on, so as long as you do what's in your heart, I believe you can do the right thing. Alright, we're all counting on you, kid. Good luck. But make no mistake, while Frisk was the key to bringing this hopefulness out of Sans, they weren't responsible for creating it. It's something he always had in him. It just became clouded over time, weakened from mental blow after mental blow. In his battle, Sans acknowledges this verbally. Sounds strange, but before all this, I was secretly hoping we could be friends. I always thought the anomaly was doing this because they were unhappy. And maybe all they needed was, I don't know, some good food, some bad laughs, some nice friends. But that's ridiculous, right? Yeah, you're the type of person who won't ever be happy. It's sad, because Undertale's meta-narrative correctly assumes that the genocide run is something most players will experience after Pacifist, and because Sans himself acknowledges that timelines are finite, many treat this as the stopping point for his arc. A sad admission that hope is a fantasy, that he was wrong to believe. A true burial of that aspect of his personality. But this doesn't have to be the case. Undertale ends where you want it to end. When everything is said and done, it's up for you to decide whether or not Sans' Ember can be salvaged, and he's more than willing to let it happen. People love to point to the unrecognizable picture from Sans' workshop because Deltarune, but many are unfamiliar with how that thread actually progresses. The initial description is well known. There's a photo album inside the drawer. There are photos of Sans with a lot of people you don't recognize. He looks happy. The Clamgrow variant is also beloved for obvious reasons. But the update that Sans makes to the album before leaving the underground speaks more to his development than anything else. There's a photo album inside the drawer. There are photos of Sans with a lot of people you don't recognize, and one photo of you standing with Sans and all your friends. He looks happy. After everything he's been through, the untold tragedies we're yet to discover, on top of the revelations we know he's come to in-game, Sans is still willing to move on, to live in the moment. His happiness, once a somber reflection of what was, becomes a signifier of what is and can be. When faced with an escape for the first time in who knows how long, Sans chooses to embrace it, to take the part of him that's telling him it's fleeting and leave it buried underground with the rest of his regrets. And the best part is, he's doing this for him. Sure, he knows Frisk has access to a secret lab after he gave him the key to his room, but it's not like he's leaving them an Easter egg in the event that they double back to rummage through his desk drawer, although that does sound very him. The workshop itself is reflective of the vulnerability Sans generally keeps hidden. He's giving himself closure. It's okay to hope, to dream, to live. The present holds just as much value as the past, more even. It's no wonder that post-pacifist content, like the 5th anniversary alarm clock dialogue, goes out of its way to show Sans putting in more effort than usual, with Papyrus even noticing and commenting on the sincerity of his joy. He's not an entirely different person or anything, he's still the Sans we know and love, but he's less troubled, comparatively unburdened. Ultimately, the strongest trap was the one that he built around himself. And only in deciding to break through, with a little help from a friend, is he able to achieve true freedom. Let's talk about someone else. I mean, Sans might be emblematic of the dual mischaracterization phenomenon, but that doesn't mean he's the only one impacted by it. While I, and more importantly you, the viewer, don't have time to go over each one in this video, I'm sure you can make the argument that every major character in Undertale has experienced it to some extent. Personally, I'm interested in exploring the ones that I consider to be particularly notable. So, next up, let's talk about Toriel, and much to her dismay, we are pairing her up with Asgore. Sorry Tori, your ex-husband is kinda important in this world. Toriel and Asgore are two of Undertale's most interesting characters to analyze, which is almost surprising given their modest amount of screen time. As the major characters that both open and bookend the story, well, kinda, we'll get to them later, it would be very easy for them to get lost in the shuffle of Undertale's more prominent characters throughout the journey. However, what makes Toriel and Asgore feel just as relevant as the characters you can visit or talk to across the entire adventure is the fact that they're never forgotten about. Toriel's kindness and guidance is something that the player carries with them at all times, especially during a pacifist run, to the point where every reminder you receive of her existence feels like a memory of an old friend. She's the one who introduces you to the friendliness this world can possess if you're willing to look for it, the warmth that can be found in even the deepest, darkest cavern. Asgore, on the other hand, is someone you carry with you in a different manner. From the moment Toriel reveals his name, you understand that he's what's waiting for you at the end of your journey, the brick wall between you and your freedom. But as you make your way through the underground, your perception of the king becomes far more layered. Can the man who's spoken of so fondly by everyone you meet really be this evil? How could someone responsible for so much hope and joy amongst his people in the most dire of circumstances do the things we know he's done, the things he's planning to do? This conflict resonates through every corner in every area, reinforced further each time someone else contributes to the positive image of Asgore built up by the monsters. And by the time you reach the Bergentrückung, the result is far scarier than what you initially imagined. Not a malicious mastermind seeking your destruction who you can easily justify defeating in self-defense, but a tired, broken man who's decided you must die all the same. Toriel and Asgore are very interesting parallels of each other, both flawed and complex with plenty of subtext to dive into. But the fact that they're in opposition means that people are often inclined to pick sides, which leads us to their own never-ending dual mischaracterization struggle, which could also be seen as tri-mischaracterization, or quad mischaracterization, etc, etc, it's endless. The constant debate between who is good and who is evil. This argument often goes beyond assertions that either party is right or wrong. No, one of these boss monsters doomed their race. Obviously, this idea completely strips the conversation of its nuance. Let's get into it. Cold open here, Asgore did a bad thing. I truly don't believe either of these characters can be discussed in depth if this isn't acknowledged, and somehow this has become a point of contention. Look, I get it. In the fantastical world of Undertale, where humans have innate time-warping abilities underground and turn into semi-sentient floating hearts after death, it's easy for the severity of Asgore's actions to be downplayed. Not to mention the fact that having a murder count of only 6 makes him a relatively merciful world leader in the grand scheme. But yes, Asgore did a bad thing. And you're not really supposed to think otherwise. The crux of that aforementioned mental conflict that most players have across their journey stems from trying to reckon with the fact that the warm, beloved king of monsters has done something this reprehensible, and trying to deduce what kind of person he truly is through the fog. Asgore Dreemurr, the benevolent ruler of the underground, visitor of schools, tea aficionado, friend to all, has personally taken the lives of 6 children. It's something that's meant to make you feel uneasy, something that stays in the back of your mind while his people elevate him as their beacon of hope. But I like to think that most people understand on some conceptual level that what Asgore did was bad. What seems to be the more pressing question is if what Asgore did was justified. We aren't privy to the entire history of humans and monsters in Undertale, just bits and pieces told through the catacombs, but we see enough to gain a solid grasp of the suffering that monsters have undergone for a somewhat ambiguous but very sizable stretch of time. The war that broke out between the two races could barely be called a war since no human souls were taken, and we know that to be true because a monster race fueled by human souls is not a monster race that loses the fight. It was that theoretical power that caused the humans to attack in the first place, spooked into action by imagining events that could take place, not ones that had. That preemptive strike is what kicked off the avalanche of pain that the monster race would undergo. The underground is a place that we, as players, are incapable of not glamorizing. It's the setting of one of our favorite games. It's filled to the brim with charming characters and banging music. Every area is beloved by millions. Every room has somebody's favorite joke, favorite item, favorite secret. So it's easy to forget that for everyone within the world of Undertale, this is a tomb. The underground is the physical embodiment of the monster's misery, their eternal punishment for losing a war they never wanted to begin with. It's a place where every corner is cramped and familiar, where children have to wish on glowing rocks in the hope of seeing real stars someday. For us, sure, it's an endearing place to visit in our bite-sized journey, but for them, it's hell. And that was before humanity decided to twist the knife further in the aftermath. There's something uniquely devastating about the loss of Chara and Asriel in the same night. We'll talk more about the actual details of the event as it relates to the two of them later, but right now we're focused on impact. Of course, there's the inherent tragedy of two children passing away, something that's often disregarded when analyzing the ripples of this event. The fact that said children were siblings, cutting their family in half and leaving their parents completely childless. Those parents already having to deal with a long stretch of violent sickness from one of the children, and grappling with the fact that they were physically incapable of fulfilling their dying wish. And on top of it all, it being the royal family of a suffering people, now deprived of their heir, their hope, and their future. When monster kind thought they were at their lowest, they were shot into an even greater despair. Humanity condemned them to torment beyond what they knew possible, while they were already enduring their previous historic blow. Escape was no longer a nice thought, it was a necessity. If the barrier was good for one thing, it was protecting them from further cruelty at the hands of the human race, but even that turned out to be untrue. They had all suffered enough, and only one man could put an end to it. Asgore's declaration of renewed war against humanity feels like it was an inevitability. Even before the loss of his children, he was still the ruler of an imprisoned populace with a fairly singular point of blame, and in many ways, from the monster's perspective, it feels logical. Suppose they broke through the barrier in some other way and attempted to establish peace. Would it even work? After what happened to Asriel, who could be sure? How could a species that subjected them to all of this be worth protecting? The eradication of humans for their cumulative benefit seemed like a form of justice, a comeuppance for the misery that they had instilled all those years ago. But at the end of the day, whether or not we think it's all justified is irrelevant, because Asgore knows it isn't. Sure, you can argue that similarly to Sans, Asgore, a man who holds an incredible amount of self-hatred, is not an unbiased judge of his own actions that are near universally supported by his people. But the fact of the matter is that Asgore never believed this was the right way to go about things. The king and queen of the underground are both victims of unimaginable pain and are both acting in response to grief. For Toriel, this meant running away from it all. For Asgore, it meant immediate, reckless action. In the direct aftermath of losing their family and her world falling apart, Toriel's husband elected to turn it into a vow of bloodshed, a proclamation that all humans must die, as if they didn't have a human child themselves, one they loved and cherished. Many claim that Toriel betrayed her people. You're certainly allowed to feel that way, but the depth of betrayal she felt is often overlooked. She felt betrayed as a partner, with Asgore going against the philosophies they formerly shared. Betrayed as a ruler, her opinion on the matter being irrelevant in the face of the king's. She felt betrayal for her children, one of whom was human, and the other who, as we know, would rather die than wipe out those who antagonized him. But most of all, she knew that Asgore was betraying himself. Let's talk about Toriel's quote-unquote plan. The idea that Asgore could have killed one human in the underground, passed through the barrier, and brought the remaining souls back is a source of endless debate. Would it have worked? Would it have failed? What would the result have been? Etc. We can argue subtleties all day. But once again, the key point here is that Asgore believes it would have worked. Toriel's plan is not Toriel's plan, as in, this is not Toriel saying what she would have done had she been in Asgore's position. She was in Asgore's position, or a similar one, and elected to leave it because she did not consider their freedom to be worth the lives of human children. We plainly see in various neutral routes, including the main one required for the pacifist ending, that in returning to the throne, she chooses to decree that humans should no longer be murdered, even if it results in her exile. The point that Toriel is making here is that Asgore was never actually committed to this. If he truly wanted to get 7 souls and achieve godhood to kick off round 2 of humans versus monsters with an ace up his sleeve, there was an easy avenue to do so, one that didn't take a minimum of decades. Asgore acknowledges this as truthful and feasible, but it's against his nature, and it always was. Asgore never wanted to kill, he never wanted to hurt people. He's a victim of his own grief-stricken impulsivity. His declaration of violence became a beacon of hope for his anguished subjects, and rather than extinguish that hope with the truth, that he agreed with his wife, that he would rather make the most out of this troubled existence, that he despised the man he was becoming, he chose to keep living the lie in the hopes that someday he wouldn't have to anymore. Someday he and Alphys could find another way out. Someday humans would stop falling into the underground. Someday one might take his life before he could take theirs, and it would all be over. But today he would stay the man he thought his people needed him to be, even if it broke her, even if it broke him. The reason why I find the Toriel and Asgore hero-villain mischaracterization saga to be so reductive, even if I evidently consider one to be more ethical than the other, is that their story really isn't about weighing their sins. It may be surprising, considering how much I seemingly villainized him, but Asgore is actually the character I prefer in this duo, and by a pretty considerable amount too. Or maybe that's not so surprising given the bulk of the segment was about him. Still, I love Toriel, but Asgore probably takes the slot of my third favorite character in Undertale, just behind Sans and Flowey. Tori might be like 6th, but it's Asgore's complexity that earns him that slot, not his moral righteousness. One of Undertale's defining questions is how will people react when faced with insurmountable odds? Asgore's stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the hard place is also made of rocks because he's underground. As is Toriel, as is Sans, as is just about everyone. Frisk is an interesting protagonist within this context because they surmount all of those odds. One of the most beloved moments in the game is literally them saying "nuh-uh" to the universe. And it's that ability to achieve the impossible, that determination, that forces everyone they meet to challenge their own preconceptions about what can or cannot be accomplished. Were the decisions they made out of assumed necessity really all that necessary? Have they boxed themselves in with walls of a status quo that doesn't need to exist? That begrudgingly accepted stasis that we saw with Sans is also present in Toriel and Asgore, as is the hope that things will change without the effort for things to change. They too have mental, emotional, and physical reasons for this, but the feeling persists regardless. And in that sense, they're much more similar than people tend to realize. Let's have a brief intermission before we move on to our final dual mischaracterization and kick back with some regular old mischaracterization, for no reason other than the fact that I feel like it, and the fact that some of you winced when you saw my Alphys placement. I see you. As if I could make a video about Undertale mischaracterization and not discuss the decade of Alphys slander we've had to endure. A couple months ago I saw someone on TikTok, known pinnacle of media literacy, say that she was a worse person than Flowey. We have lost the plot. I'm gonna make this snappy. Let's talk about the whole Alphys is a bad person thing. Evidently, I disagree. Alphys is a very flawed person, as is the vast majority of Undertale's cast. She's also a victim of those aforementioned impossible situations that so many of this game's characters find themselves confronted with. I think the main reason Alphys receives more unwarranted flack for this, outside of the obvious and more disheartening possibility, is the fact that the ramifications of her actions are plainly visible to the player. We don't witness the demise of the humans that fell before Frisk at the hands of Asgore, or the damage that Undyne's unrelenting murderous passion could have done to other non-Frisk children had she been around at the time. We don't get to see Sans break his promise outside of the most justified circumstances possible, or get to experience the hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions, of suffering-filled timelines that Flowey was responsible for. These are things that have happened, or could have happened. The true lab situation is happening in real time. As such, in terms of perception, Alphys has a higher hill to climb than most other characters. It's more difficult to brush off things that occur right in front of us. But Undertale isn't about brushing off its characters' mistakes to make them more palatable. The decision to give mercy isn't made based on whether or not we can forget enough about their past to deem them worthy now. It's about understanding, meeting these people where they are, flaws and all, and accepting them or accepting the idea that they can be better. Alphys' experiments, which were requested by Asgore, mind you, certainly leave a bad taste in your mouth. The appearance of Snowdrake's mother is always one of the game's heaviest moments to me. It's difficult to swallow, but the experiments themselves, as horribly as they turned out, really aren't the primary issue. It's Alphys' lack of honesty and transparency. The monsters who had fallen down were all consensually given to Asgore for scientific purposes. The usage of their bodies and souls, while unsavory, was part of the general expectation. It's not surprising that a species this starved for freedom would go to these lengths. But Alphys hiding the true nature of the results led to a lot of heartache. Monsters couldn't use the dust of their family members for their funerals. They were given the miraculous announcement that their loved ones were alive, only to be met with radio silence and the eventual news that they'd become something else entirely. Alphys' problem was cyclical. She hated herself so much for the things she'd done that she couldn't fathom telling those affected. And by keeping them in the dark, their reasonable anger intensified, thereby increasing her self-hatred. She's hanging by a thread at the time we meet her, and it's not surprising that when the few things tethering her to this world are taken away, like Undyne and Mettaton, she often ends up cutting herself loose. But Alphys' ability to persevere in spite of this is what makes her such an engaging character. It's like Undyne says, she cares, she's passionate. Once she decides to reject her internal, unproductive resentment and face true accountability, however difficult it may be, not only does she benefit, but so do those she thought she'd irreparably damaged. She'd only done the experiments in the first place because she wanted to help people, and in the end, through all the pain and anguish, she kind of did. Alphys finding out that she had people to fall back on, and that her world was never as empty as her mind made it out to be, was the life-changing revelation that both she and the Underground needed. Undertale is a game about choices, and it constantly opposes the idea of being too far gone. Asgore can still alter his mission, Sans can still find meaning, Alphys can still be truthful. The game is structured to continuously one-up the previous unspareable enemy, proving time and time again that change is possible so long as it's sought out and worked for. So what would it look like if someone never got the chance? Chara Dreemurr will always remain Undertale's most interesting character to discuss, or at the very least, my personal favorite. They also, in my opinion, just so happen to be one of the game's most misinterpreted elements. Sans might be the face of dual mischaracterization, but he merely adopted that title over time. Chara was birthed in the flames of petty online discourse. People are already willing to go to war over how I pronounce their name, and it's been 15 seconds. To be fair, Chara's a difficult person to unpack, for a multitude of reasons. For one, they're dead. And while we can undo that with a little bit of elbow grease and EXP, their actual physical appearance, if you can even call it that, is still very limited, intentionally so. They're more so someone you feel with you on your journey, rather than another character to act, item, and spare against. Which builds up the next point, Chara the idea versus Chara the human. Earlier, I referred to Chara's, quote, conceptual weirdness, which is my very formal way of saying that their role is beyond that of a typical video game character's. Something I discussed in my meta-narrative analysis from last year is that, while Chara the character and Chara the concept are very much intertwined, it can often be difficult to deduce where one ends and the other begins. When do the things we see Chara do stop being characterization and start being wider messaging? Does it ever stop being characterization? What is the extent of their involvement in anything? Safe to say, these are very important questions that breed many interesting and varied responses. And Chara being so hotly debated on every level, from morality to motivation to their standing as a character in this story, inevitably opens the door for dual mischaracterization. On one side, you have the classic, evil Chara, the one that everyone blamed for their every decision. That wasn't me, that was Chara. Chara killed him. 2018 comes around and this new kid is looking at me funny. Seems like some Charification is afoot. This Chara cared for no one, had no desires beyond their own twisted self-interests. Essentially, a scapegoat. The Underground is a land of intricacy where everyone is a product of their environment and is, to a certain extent, understandable. And yet, so much misery persists. How can there be this much bad in a world with this much good in it? That doesn't track. Wouldn't it be nice if we had someone to hold singularly accountable? A source to blame for all of Undertale's problems? A figure to embody all the sorrow that sunk its roots into the lives of these people? After all, it's easier to point than to think. Soon enough, dedicated fans started to pick up on what was happening with Chara and, as we've seen over and over, turned way in the opposite direction. Thus, baby Chara was born. This Chara had no agency and made no mistakes. They were simply too young and/or damaged and/or pressured to comprehend the gravity of the decisions they made, and as such, cannot truly be held accountable for any of them. They had no role to play in Frisk's journey, whatever form it may take, and solely existed to add to the tragedy of Asriel and the Dreemurr family. The primary ideology of this interpretation of Chara is to eliminate all of the excessive, unjustified blame from the early days and replace it with nothing, to turn them into a faultless bystander. And once again, the biggest issue with both of these mischaracterizations isn't that they're fundamentally wrong, even though you can certainly argue that to be the case, it's that they're boring. Why take one of Undertale's messiest, most layered characters and turn them into the epitome of good or evil in the aftermath? Just like their mother, father, and brother, Chara is made interesting through their complexity, not because of how well they can fill a narrative archetype. Let's talk about them. Chara suffered. That's possibly the most succinct way to describe the basis of their character, and yet it simultaneously feels like an understatement. But really, while the depths to which Chara suffered are shrouded in mystery, the effects of that suffering inform their every decision, and we see that. Whatever they endured on the surface was so painful that throwing themselves down Mount Ebit was preferable. And even after they were in the Underground and adopted by the Dreemurrs, they were once again willing to give their life, this time to get revenge on humanity and return monsters to their rightful home on the surface. Chara cannot be unpacked as a character without understanding how their pain affects them and their decision making. Just because we aren't given the full details doesn't mean we can't piece things together. Some would rather believe that a child would despise humanity enough to throw their life away, for no reason other than being evil, than consider the obvious idea of humanity having done something to them. Chara's vengeance is so often portrayed as purposeless just because our hands aren't held in figuring out why Chara might do this or feel this way. It's like if Toriel went through her whole spiel about destroying the exit to the ruins so no one could escape again, but didn't mention the whole Asgore murder thing. Many would come away with the conclusion that she was just a crazy old lady doing crazy old lady business, even though that's obviously not the case. But through acknowledging how Chara's suffering informs their decision making, we also have to recognize those decisions as their own. Revoking Chara of their agency is to revoke them of their identity. Through their time in the Underground, we see that Chara becomes very close with the Dreemurrs. The fact that they become a second child to Asgore and Toriel is another fact that's often underplayed to de-emphasize the relationships they were able to foster. Asriel is their friend and brother, the game makes that clear. But that also makes their manipulation of Asriel more difficult to stomach. Chara's plan did not arise out of nowhere. When a human child who has shown tragic disregard for their own life in the past gets hailed by an entire civilization as the budding future of their people, it's not surprising that they would eventually attempt to give their life for that purpose. It's possible that this is the first time Chara's felt as though they had any purpose, at the very least purpose for a species they respected, and the plan they devised, as unsettling as it is, was intelligent on a base level. It was intelligent to find a way to develop and disguise the nature of their illness. It was intelligent to fake an impossible request that would grant them the excuse necessary to gather the souls, and it was intelligent to kill two birds with one stone, exacting revenge on humanity while also earning monsters their freedom. I say this not to prop up and encourage the extensive suicidal plot of someone who was very clearly in pain and mentally ill, but to emphasize the fact that Chara, while still a child and prone to the failings of one, was capable and aware. So to claim that the manipulation of Asriel was just, I don't know, an unintentional side effect seems very inaccurate to me. In fact, it was crucial. Chara needed Asriel on their side. He was quite literally 50% of the plan. They essentially pulled a trust fall between the planes of life and death. And if they had to tell Asriel that big kids didn't cry over this, or downplay the severity of the situation to get him on board, then that's just what they had to do. But that doesn't mean that Chara didn't care about Asriel. They might have ignored his worries, but the plan was never for their brother to lose his life. It was Asriel who decided to hold their power back when the humans attacked, taking blow after blow when they never needed to. Chara had assumed that in spite of his initial resistance, they would be on the same page when it came time to execute the actual plan. Even so, this was still a very immoral thing to do, and I don't think infantilizing Chara and their comprehension serves anyone any good, even factoring in how damaged their worldview had become due to external factors. Chara and Asriel were the first to fall victim to the impossible decision, but it was Chara's response to their own that forced Asriel to make his. Chara opposed the idea of monsters rotting underground while the human race they'd seen the dark in thrived on the surface. And in seeking to rectify this, while putting both them and their brothers' lives on the line, Asriel was confronted with the inevitability of blood, but the choice of who would end up bleeding. Or dusting, whatever. Both sacrificed their lives for something they viewed as greater than them, Chara a result and Asriel an idea, taking their final breaths in opposition. Chara didn't have to do what they did. They made a choice, a severe one, and it cost them their life, cutting their story short. But that's not their ending, is it? If we feel them with us throughout Undertale, as I claimed before, then where do we leave them? Well, just like the rest of the game's cast, you get to decide. Previously, I've claimed that Undertale is about Chara and Asriel on every level, both in-universe and metacontextually, regardless of route, regardless of decision. Their history informs the story, and said story is built upon their active post-death participation. They're as core to the game as Frisk's influence on its happenings, and it's through this lens that we're able to witness Chara accomplish something that they weren't able to do within their time on Earth, something that every other character in Undertale is presented with the opportunity to do: change. The fate of the Dreemurrs siblings and their relationship is fully dependent on the outcome of Frisk's journey and the outcome of ours with the game. Sorry, yes, it's time to get meta, but with this character in particular, you kinda have to. To return to our aforementioned dilemma, Chara the concept and Chara the character are intertwined, but they're simultaneously at the cost of one another. The more we give into their quote-unquote purpose, the more we take away from their humanity. In the Genocide run, both Chara and Asriel are in their most representational incarnations. This makes sense, as the game is undeniably at its most self-reflective at this point. For Flowey, this means tapping into the player's mindset, bringing to light their hypocrisy and warped perception of the world they supposedly hold dear. For Chara, this means embodying their drive, the will to advance, the fuel to complete. That's what their entire speech is about. You. With your guidance, I realized the purpose of my reincarnation. Power. Together, we eradicated the enemy and became strong. HP, attack, defense, gold, EXP, love. Every time a number increases, that feeling, that's me, Chara. The Dreemurr children in this route are direct analogs of the player, outlook and consequence, idea and result. But that doesn't mean they aren't completely there. Their falling out repeats itself on a much grander scale. Asriel committing himself to Chara's plan, later backing out when confronted with the reality of the situation, and dying for his decision in a manner that very much implies some semblance of sibling angst remains in what many assume is a purely representational husk. We exacerbate their pre-existing issues to a cosmic boiling point. There is no peace, no reconciliation, only the reinforcement of their worst attributes. Because that's what this Chara is. A dehumanized manifestation of their most damaging traits that's taken at face value solely because it's their only physical physical appearance in the game. The entire route shows Asriel at his worst, emotionally repressed as he may be, but we don't assume that to be representative of how he always was. In terms of characterization, we know that Chara does share attributes with their Geno counterpart. Their dedication to filling their cup to the brim, for instance, echoes the efficiency that would later take a much darker turn. And we know from Asriel's 9th anniversary letter that their fixation on the number 9 began long before defeating Sans. My best friend's favorite number is 9. It's because there isn't a number that's higher. 9, 99, 999, 9,999. If everything gets high enough, you become invincible. Nothing can hurt you anymore. Nothing can hurt anyone anymore. Yeah, very evil of you, kid. Just like Asriel's dependency takes on a more unsettling form in Geno, so too do Chara's ideals, pushing them both far beyond the parameters of their original selves, distant echoes of who they once were. But once again, it doesn't have to be this way. Just as we can push the Dreemurrs siblings' relationship to its seemingly inevitable destruction, in which they both lose themselves in the process, we can also set them on the path towards peace. Now there's one person left to save: Chara. The extent to which Chara is involved in a neutral or pacifist playthrough of Undertale is heavily debated to this day. Some people believe in Narra Chara, the idea that Chara is the narrator at all times regardless of route, seeing as certain comments seem bizarre, void of their own personal context. Others deny their involvement altogether. I personally believe they pitch in whenever they, and more specifically Toby Fox, thinks it's relevant for them to, frequently, but not all the time, which is basically me saying a line is from Chara when I want it to be. Regardless, Chara's influence on the narrative is undeniable, and Undertale's 10th anniversary livestream only served to reinforce this fact. During the celebration, Toby Fox provided a ton of additional insight into both the development of Undertale and its characters, including some very notable statements about Chara. Not only was it heartwarming to see him fight for a character he very clearly adored after a decade of spoiler-conscious avoidance, but it was also incredibly validating to have my and many others' interpretation of Chara's arc acknowledged in a single moment. The climax of Asriel's fight is accompanied with this line from Toby, one that's taken to mean two different things. Now there's one person left to save, Chara, implying they're the one doing the saving, and now there's one person left to save, Chara, implying they're the one being rescued. And in my eyes, both are accurate. This scene is a direct inverse of what the duo endured on the surface while executing Chara's plan. A lifetime later, far longer through the perception of Asriel, the siblings are reunited through the power of determination, but this time, Chara is able to change, just like everyone else Frisk impacted on their journey. They reach out to their brother, and in doing so, they save themselves in the process. Both have gone through the unimaginable. They've experienced life, death, and everything in between, and yet, this is the defining moment of their existence across all planes. Their relationship is what's at stake here, just like in Genocide, and only through reconciling after all the pain and misery they've gone through is Chara able to find peace and redemption. The point of the pacifist ending isn't to sweep Chara and Asriel's damaged relationship under the rug, far from it. Asriel fully acknowledges how dysfunctional it was with renewed clarity, saying that Chara might not have been the greatest person. He begins to reckon with the fact that the perfect friendship he'd projected might not have been accurate to reality. And yet, he's still here, watering their flowers, an intentional juxtaposition of the other possible ending to their relationship that we could orchestrate. The love they shared, no matter the baggage it later adopted, never dissipated. And it's by reminding Asriel of that love that we're able to break through to him in the first place. This is more opinionated, but I like to imagine that Chara can rest after this. Ghosts or spirits in fiction are often accompanied by the concept of unfinished business, and Frisk's fall into the underground gives Chara the chance to complete their own. They just have to choose what it's going to be. And we get to help them make that choice. Mischaracterization is a funny thing. Usually, takes that we would call slanderous against a piece of art we enjoy are slung by its detractors, but mischaracterization has the funny tendency to be perpetuated by the fans of a work. Sometimes, an interpretation becomes so widespread that it dominates the space both within and outside of a community. It's also funny how the concept itself can be a little indistinct, which I guess makes dual mischaracterization doubly vague. Something I tried my best to stray from in this analysis was the concept of objectivity. Undertale is my favorite video game. I consider myself to be a major fan and have been here for nearly the entire decade of its existence. A lot of this game's characters are some of my favorite characters in the medium, with a handful expanding beyond it. So yeah, generally, I pride myself in my comprehension, try my best to stay as well-versed as I can be on the subject matter, and aim to inform others about what I believe the creator is trying to convey. But at the end of the day, it's one interpretation. One of the most valuable pieces of insight from Undertale's 10th anniversary stream, aside from validating my pronunciation of Chara, alongside 2 other pronunciations of Chara, was the emphasis placed on personal experience. While we received a ton of new information that could very well be considered canon, Toby goes out of his way to remind us that this is all just another interpretation of what's presented to us in Undertale, things that were never not there just because we couldn't see them. He calls upon the audience to make Undertale into what they want it to be, and that's something that strongly resonated with me during my creative process. Whatever I claim to be mischaracterization stems from my own subjective understanding of these characters. Now, this isn't me turning over and claiming that the Undertale cast is suddenly void of concrete personalities to analyze just because we have the power of imagination, simply an admission that, while based upon concrete analysis, at the end of the day, these are my opinions. From Asgore morality to Chara redemption, I'm sure there's a lot to disagree with. But that's the best part. Let's circle back to our main man and one of his main moments, Sans' reaction to Papyrus' death, one of the most passionately explored parts of the entire game. Why are people so fixated on it? Because it precedes the mandatory Sans fight scene? Maybe. But I propose something different. It's because we don't get to see it. It exists solely as an idea, conceptually poignant but physically absent, a blank canvas for fans to portray their passion for the character and love for the game. Are all of them 100% accurate to how Sans carries himself in Undertale? Maybe not. Does that matter? Definitely not. What some of these may lack in accuracy, they make up for in authenticity. Each one shows us what Sans means to somebody, thereby adding to a grander conversation about the character, allowing videos like this to exist at all. That's the sincerity. My grasp on Undertale and its cast was built through a decade of discussion, and I'm sure that by participating further, my outlook may differ another decade from now, and another decade from then. As Undertale's identity continues to evolve, so too does our connection and understanding of the game. And seeing as the player is an active participant of the Undertale experience, it stands to reason that we are also representative of its primary ideals. We are not static. There'll always be more to learn, always be more to see. Some of these characters may soon receive additional context that alter our perceptions of them altogether. Some might stay restricted to Undertale as we know it, but become recontextualized through our own lived experiences. Everything is in flux. Just because the game is completed doesn't mean we stop getting things out of it, and the extent to which we get things out of it is only limited by our own imagination. Undertale's characters have dominated the internet and my mind for 10 years, and through whatever canonical expansions they may receive or whatever level of mischaracterization they may undergo, I cannot wait to keep growing alongside them. Just don't mischaracterize Vegetoid, I somehow care now.